Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why I say we should get our good mornings as strong as our squats. Now, this sounds crazy to a lot of people. It is something that Louis Simmons has said, and it's something I looked at when he said it. I looked at it closely instead of saying, let's just reject this or accept it. I looked at it deeper of why he might say that. And it has to do with understanding human biomechanics. Because he said that. He's like, you'll never miss a squat lockout if your good morning is as strong as your squat. And when we say a squat in this context, we're talking about a power squat. We are not talking about an Olympic squat. An Olympic squat is where you sit straight down, oftentimes into a full squat, as deep as you can go, well below parallel, ass to grass, with your torso upright. All right, it makes it a more quad dominant movement. Now, when I say that, people say, oh, it builds more quads. Not necessarily. It just means that it uses less hip. And when we look at these different lower body lifts, most lower body lifts fall on a continuum. This is, again, assuming they're multi-joint. Let's take out anything that is a single joint. We're not talking about a leg extension or a leg curl, basically. Multi-joint exercises. They fall somewhere between a squat and hip hinge continuum. Over here, we would have a full squat. Over here, we would have a pure hip hinge. Most movements fall in between, and that includes all the deadlift variations. And most people who've looked at the deadlift realize they're all hip hinges, but they get squattier depending upon what you do. Conventional is the most hip hingey, least squatty. Trap bar deadlift next, and then a sumo deadlift is the most squatty. And how do we define squatty? How much the knee bends. How many degrees you take the knee extension through, right? That's what determines if it's a squat. A power squat is less squatty and more hip hingey than a full Olympic squat, right? Hopefully you're following that. You bend the knee a little bit less because it's not necessary to reach parallel, right? Because you're taking a wider stance. You're pushing your hips back more. You can reach parallel with less degrees of knee flexion. However, we go through slightly longer, depending upon the person's individual levers. We may have slightly more hip extension. Well, flexion on the eccentric and then extension on the concentric wrap, right? You may be taking it through your entire full hip extension, the full range of motion. What is a good morning? What's a good morning? Good morning is the same movement, but with less knee flexion occurring on the eccentric, so less total knee extension. Your knee bends to a lesser degree. How do we determine range of motion on a good morning? When the hips have gone through their full range of motion for your stance, right? Because we don't roll the back, we keep the back locked. The back is used purely for stabilizing on a good morning, right? We're not rounding it. We may have to some on a safety bar good morning, the nature of the lift. But generally, we're trying to keep the chest up. We're trying to keep the upper back in extension. And we're not really rolling the lower back. We are hinging at the hip and pushing our hips back. And the bottom of the range of motion is when your hips stop. In other words, if that's as far as your hips will allow you to go, that is your full range of motion. While keeping the bar mid-foot. Type of good morning a lot of people, bodybuilders, think of as a good morning. This is not what we do for strength purposes. Is where the bar drifts in front of your midfoot. Well, that doesn't work. We're hinging as far as we can and pushing the hips back while keeping the bar midfoot, which should be our master cue on all barbell exercises. And it amazes me that people will understand that any standing exercise, you keep the bar over the middle of your foot. This is a master cue. Everyone knows this. If this is stuff you learn in basic lifting, right? They teach you this even in starting strength, for God's sake. So if you don't know that, you don't even know the basic fundamentals that a novice should know about lifting. The barbell stays over the middle of your foot on any exercise where you're standing. So why would people think the good morning doesn't follow that same master cue? It's the most simple, basic cue that we apply to every lift, even an overhead press, right? So it's a hip movement. You're not rolling your back. It's isometric strength for everything in the back. right? We get this. How does it differ from a power squat? The amount of knee bending. That's it. The amount of knee bending. If you were to take your power squat or your deep box squat and film it from the side, go to the bottom, and then film your good mornings from the side, and you were to transpose it, they would be identical. Your angles of between what your thighs and your torso do, they are the exact same movement. But what you are doing is training the hip extensors more, right? You're training the hip extensors more, and you're having to handle heavier loads on the back. Why? Because your angles are more extreme relative to gravity. But if you can then handle that weight, so we're getting interesting. If you can handle that weight in that position, your back has enough isometric strength that you can keep it in extension on a squat, even near the lockout when things get heavy. Because a lot of times as we're coming up, that back angle can become exaggerated on the way back up, especially once we get through our sticking point. Where the quads have driven us through our sticking point, it's all hip and back extension at that point to finish a squat. And if you can't stabilize that load on the way up, you miss lockouts. Because it's not a quad weakness anymore. Once you get through the sticking point, your quads are now in a position, the normal sticking point, which is a few inches above parallel, about 4 inches above parallel, depending upon the person. That's our standard sticking point, because that's the transition point where the quads are now in a mechanical advantage position. They are not going to limit your squat anymore. Right? Your quads are now in a position to where they are having a very easy job of the work. They're no longer stretched. They just have to finish locking out. Your quads are strongest in that position because of the moment arms. Now it's a matter of your hips finishing it. You have to have hip extension to finish it, and you have to have the isometric strength in the back to maintain that position and keep the bar midfoot, just like on a good morning. Okay, what we are doing on the top half of a power squat when it gets heavy is a slightly easier version of the good morning. So in other words, if your good morning is as strong as the squat that you want to hit, you will never miss a lockout. You'll never miss a lockout because your quads and glutes get you started out of the bottom. And as soon as you're a third of the way up, they're no longer limiting factors anymore. All the muscles of the good morning determine if you can make that squat or not. Okay? So in other words, what I'm saying is basically a person could get really strong at good mornings, never do a squat and do some extra quad work and build quads to be stronger in a deep stretch position, and they'll come in and have a ridiculously high squat. And I don't mean high as in you squatted high, I mean their strength will be really good. Okay? Because really it's just a matter of building the muscles of the good morning works and just building your quads more to go along with it. But essentially that's what it is. A good morning is a power squat, but with more emphasis on the hamstrings, less emphasis on the quads, and having to stabilize heavier loads due to the moment arm involved relative to gravity for the isometric strength of the back. And that's what a good morning is. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.